Welcome to ASE's virtual book launch, celebrating the release of the ASE Comprehensive Strain Imaging textbook. We are thrilled that you are with us tonight. We have with us our two editors, our lead editor, Dr. Thomas Morwick, and our associate editor, Dr. Theodore Abraham. And they are going to go through and just kind of highlight the contents of the book. And we encourage you to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. If you'll just submit your questions there, and we'll keep an eye on them, and then we'll reserve time at the end to answer any questions you might have. So let me turn it over to Dr. Morwick.
Thanks very much, Christina, and thanks everyone for joining. Ted, great to see you. These COVID days, this is the only way we can interact internationally. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm really thrilled about the release of this book on strain, and I hope it's useful to people. I have to say that it was really a labor of love, and I'm very grateful to experts really all over the world. You can see familiar names there in the USA, Japan, Europe, and Australia. So it was really an excellent, the A team for strain. Have the next slide, please. So this is the list of 10 big topics. We tried to keep the book focused on things that we thought were clinically important for people using strain in their clinical practice. So the first is about applications and techniques, and then we went into left ventricular topics about subclinical heart failure, the evaluation of people with symptomatic heart failure, cardiomyopathies, some very interesting stuff about the use of strain in arrhythmias and CRT, diastolic dysfunction, and then the non-LV topics, the valvular heart disease, ischemic heart disease, right ventricular function, and then some very interesting things about the future applications of strain. Next slide, please. So Ted and I were just going to take you through some highlights from each of the chapters. I think the first one to start with is really why we did this book in the first place, which is really to help clinicians with the application of strain. And I think people are aware of the fact that strain is helpful in the assessment of potential cardiotoxicity, as well as the assessment of the LV, but actually the evidence base is quite extensive for a variety of topics. And we certainly use it in other situations than assessment of the LV. And Ted, I know your group has been interested in non-LV applications as well.
Yes, thank you, Tom. First of all, congratulations to you for leading this effort. And I think this is a really high quality piece of work, thanks to your insistence on it being the best. So I think this is a great first effort, but truly a volume that we've been already using and giving it to our sonographers and fellows. So thank you for everything you did to make this such a great product. We use it for both left atrium, right ventricle, but also primarily for the LV, like most other folks, for cardiomyopathies and chemotoxicity.
Yeah, great, thank you. Christina, let's have the next slide, please. So the first chapter is really a bunch of methodological things about applying strain. And I think people that are unfamiliar with strain, are often anxious about how readily that they can apply it in their lab. And what we've done in part of this chapter is just to go through the setup of the most widely used systems for measurement of strain. And it gets really into the learning curve for this. And Ted, I'm interested in your observations. You have a big lab there. How do you handle the learning curve with your sonographers in particular? Is there a particular cohort of sonographers that you asked to do this, or is it widely used? How do you approach this?
So, thank you, Tom. Great question. And yes, we do use it widely, and it preceded my arriving in at San Francisco. And mostly we start with a very specific cohort of sonographers, like you mentioned, those with interest or prior experience, and folks that we train up. So we have at least 2 I would say, master's level sonographers who know strain inside out can do a fair amount of analysis and put that up in the report, because although we do have a system that can get into the report, get into the raw image, we like to have it all done on the machine if possible. And then we have a group of 5 or 7 sonographers who would say, I'd say, are second tier folks who do a fair amount of strain. And there's a lot of feedback with every case almost.
Yeah. So I think that is the best model for starting off with strain. I do think that strain on the LV is something that can be incorporated into the routine echo exam. And in a way, it's, you know, one of those things that, you know, you do a lot of and you get good at. So I'm certainly a fan of that, but it is really helpful to have some people that are very expert in the sonography team just to help troubleshoot. Let's go to the next slide, Christine. Thank you. So the second chapter is about the use in cardio-oncology, and I think this is the aspect of strain that is probably most widely used. We use it a lot. There have been some new developments there. You see on the right-hand side of the slide, the assessment of myocardial work there, which incorporates blood pressure. I think this is useful if the blood pressure changes from one test to the next. But I don't think it's necessary to use in every strain exam. And I think if the patient's in a similar hemodynamic situation in sequential evaluations, then global longitudinal strain is a good tool on its own. Ted, you use this widely in your lab, I'm sure.
We not clinically, we're still in the research arena, but I think the example that you're showing on the slide is a great reason to get it into the clinic.
Yeah, I think one of the things here that is important is that the reason why strain is so robust is really a miracle of statistics and averaging more than a miracle of physiology. So, you know, you're measuring shortening all the way over the ventricle, and so although you're going to have noise perhaps in an individual strain curve, and obviously if it's overtly noisy, you should exclude it. The fact that you're averaging, I think, reduces the impact of noise. And I think that's the reason why this has been so robust. Next slide, thank you. The next chapter is on heart failure. And there's a lot of really interesting material in this, particularly related to heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. But what I've chosen to put up on the slide here is about right ventricular strain. The right ventricle is a ventricle that is not quantified adequately, I think, in most labs. It's a difficult ventricle to quantify, and the measurement of either global or free wall right ventricular strain is very helpful, and I think is ready for prime time. Next slide, please, Christine. So chapter 4 is about the myopathic ventricle, and obviously we're often confronted by a ventricle that is thickened, and we're pondering about the differential diagnosis of strain. And here we're looking not so much at the global measurement, but the distribution of measurements around the ventricle. And you can see there various interpretations of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, amyloidosis with the typical apical sparing pattern, the diffuse change in hypertensive left ventricular hypertrophy, and then the possibility of other pathologies in the setting of normal wall thickness. Ted, what's your feeling about using this in the hypertrophic ventricle? Do you have experience with that?
Yes, we do use it almost in everybody that comes in with a suspected or known diagnosis, and also in their family members when they're being screened for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a great tool, and we've really been very enamored.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that you know, as you're able to pick up subclinical changes here, this is something that's useful in family members. And in fact, there's some really fascinating literature about you know, genotype positive people in families and the time frame of the change of strain. So yes, that's a really important point. Next slide, please, Christine. The next slide is about pacing and arrhythmias, and the left-hand side of this is about the use in CRT. And I think that the mechanical assessment of dyssynchrony has been very problematic for us, and I'm not sure that the problem has really been solved. But unequivocally, we still have an issue with probably 30 to 40%, or in some cases even more, of people that have a CRT apparently being non-responders. And there have been a number of efforts to try and resolve this using strain markers of dyssynchrony. On the right-hand side of the slide is the assessment of dispersion of mechanical function in the ventricle, and this is kind of the analog of measuring the degree of scar in the ventricle, and a marker of the risk of serious arrhythmias such as VT and VF. The group in Norway have been leaders in this. I think measuring timing is less robust than measuring actual magnitude of strain or patterns of strain, but it is there's a significant amount of data about this, and it is an interesting application. So I think it's an area that we'll see more of. Next slide, please, Christina. The sixth chapter is about the assessment of left atrial strain, and there's two aspects of this that I think are interesting. One is in the assessment of diastolic function. I think we all struggle with the diastology guidelines and the people with the indeterminate results. And left atrial strain is a means of addressing this and reducing the number of indeterminates. And on the right is the use of atrial strain for predicting recurrence in people that have had atrial fibrillation. And I think this is a really interesting application of strain. Ted, you mentioned that your lab uses atrial strain.
Yes, I think we're still doing it, but not applying it as much for decision making at this point. But yes, it's been a very attractive tool for us.
I think one of the challenges really is that the functional assessment of the atrium has been problematic for us before, and here is a reasonably simple and seemingly pretty robust marker of atrial function. Next slide, please, Christine. So the chapter on valvular heart disease, the strain has been used really in all of the valve lesions, but the one I think where there's the strongest evidence base is in aortic stenosis. And we know that if you have a patient with aortic stenosis, if the ejection fraction is less than 60%, rather than less than 50 or 55%, less than 60%, then the patient's at higher risk. And strain, I think, has enabled us to be a bit more granular about assessing left ventricular function. And really, what you're seeing here is a summary of a meta-analysis. It's really very persuasive that there is prognostic data here. Next slide, please, Christina. The eighth chapter is on the assessment of ischemia, and the take-home message here is that it's not so much the peak value of strain, but the morphology of the strain signal that is important. So as tissue becomes ischemic, it demonstrates delayed contraction, and you see that in the green and in the green arrow in particular. And as it becomes very ischemic, then you can see some early systolic stretch. So it's the morphology here rather than the peak that is useful in stress testing. But in general, I think the use of strain in stress testing has lagged behind. I think there are temporal resolution issues that are particularly problematic when the heart rate's going at 130 after getting off the treadmill. And so this, I think, is still in most people's hands a research tool. Next slide, please. The chapter 9 is about the assessment of the right ventricle, and this is some interesting work that's detailed there about the assessment of ARVC and the change of the strain morphology as the risk of arrhythmias increases in ARVC. And the next slide, please, Christina. And the final chapter deals with the development of the technology. And in fact, although strain has come a long way in the last 10 years, there are some really interesting things being developed with strain. The aspect that I'm really fascinated by is shear wave imaging to do tissue characterization. But there are certainly, many other potential applications. And Ted, I'm sure in your lab, a source of ongoing research interest for your group too.
Absolutely, Tom. I think everything that this slide summarizes, many of these particular topics are targets for research in our lab.
Yeah. So Christina, thanks for giving us the opportunity to summarize what's in the book. I think it's a really interesting text. Now, one aspect of the book that I think is really useful is the use of e-text for finding material, seeking references, and so on. And Christina, you're going to take us through that, I think.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for that overview. I think it was great. Let me just go over here. So when you purchase the book, on the inside cover of the book, there will be instructions on how to get access to the e-version. We are also selling the e-version standalone if you would rather just have that. All of our books are located on our Learning Hub, and we'll have a slide at the end of the presentation to show you how you can purchase that. So once you enter the code, you are directed to the book itself. And so this is Elsevier is our publisher, and this is their platform that they have put together for us. And it's very robust. You can start just like a regular book if you wanted to and go page by page. You do that just by scrolling down. But you can also go through and look at individual chapters. If you're only interested in certain chapters, you can click on it and it will show you all of the subheadings within that chapter. Pardon me. If you didn't want to bother with the navigate bar, you can always just close that and then you see the full text and you can go through as you wish. Some of the nice features that are here, as you go into a chapter, and you're reading through, if there's a table referenced, if there is a figure that is referenced or a real reference, you can click on it and it will take you to that particular object. So in this case, it was referencing 2 through 5. I can actually click on the link to PubMed, and if I had a subscription to PubMed or was logged in, I could actually see the full content of the article itself. And it does that in a new window, so you don't have to lose where you were. And then we can go right back to the text. The other nice thing is you have the ability to make notations while you're in the book itself. So you can highlight specific text that you want to reference later. You can also add a note. So okay, so I put my note in there. And then once we have all our notes, we can click over here on the information icon, and it'll show you any notes that I've taken for this particular chapter. I can also go ahead and click the star, and that will actually make that my favorite, or bookmark it so that I can go back to it at a later time. So if I close up chapter 1, and let's say I want to go to chapter 4, and I'm scrolling down through and I'm, reading along. Any of the illustrations, if I want to see them larger, just click on the link, show me a larger version. So maybe I want to get a little bit more clarity on that. Go back to my text. And then my videos, let's see. If I go to the subheading of strain as a diagnostic tool, you'll notice that it referenced several videos. If I click on a video, it'll actually load it for me. And it takes a little bit for the title slide. We're talking to them about cutting down the time for the title slide so you get right to the video, but then it'll show you the video itself. And again, nice reference point. And you can, obviously replay it, and I don't think it has any sound to it. So There is a library of all of the videos in one place. If you just want to walk through those, you're able to do that. Or again, you can do it through the text itself. Same is true as if you're going, so here's the still of that same video. Here's an example of another one. Again, you can just click on it. It will take you to the video in the library and, pardon me, play that particular video. And I apologize for my being a little slow here. So another option that you have is your notebook. So as I'm going through and making notes on each chapter, I can go back to my notebook and look at all of the notes I've made throughout all of the chapters. So again, giving me, so here's the one I just did that said, you know, just a reminder that I want to refer to this. If I click on it, it takes me right to it. I had made some previously when I was going through this. So it actually keeps the date that you made it, which is, you know, nice. And here's an example of a bookmark. So I bookmarked this chapter. I can just go to it. Well, actually the subheading of that chapter, and it just takes me right there. So it's a really nice tool. Again, gives you a little bit more flexibility. If I wanted to go through and search a specific topic, about like amyloidosis, searches through the entire text and shows me where all of the results are for that statement. If I click on it, again, it'll take me right to it and highlight the word for me so I know where it is. So it's a nice way to use it as a reference book as well. So hopefully you
Christina, we've lost you. Can you hear Ted?
I cannot hear Christina.
Okay.
So maybe Tom, you want to?
Yeah. So I'd be very happy to take any questions from the audience. Don't see any questions in the Q&A. All right. Ted, any final comments?
Though I thought that was a great overview. I think Christina may have lost internet connection. I think our participants are still on, so we'll wait for Christina to get back on. But I thought that was very well summarized, Tom, and I think it's a great book. And the ebook really is very useful at your fingertips, and the navigation, the addition of notes and highlighting. It's like we've got all the tools of a regular book and just electronically available.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that I think some of those things are really helpful, actually, and the ability not to have to lug the book around with you is attractive too. So I see one question coming up in the Q&A. Will strain be utilized with UEAs? Ted, you might be more familiar with that abbreviation than I am.
Oh, it's an ultrasound. It's contrast, ultrasound enhancing agent.
Ah, right.
Yes.
So yes, that's a good question. So I think the way I think about this is that the different methodologies involve different things. So some of the companies have got an edge tracking methodology. And there, some of them have actually used the strain with ultrasound contrast agent. Some of the companies use true speckle tracking within the wall, and ultrasound contrast agent is not good news there at all. So it depends on exactly what methodology you're using. Our practice in our lab is to use the strain on the native image without the ultrasound contrast. I think that it is still image quality dependent, and so if you're struggling with an image, then probably strain is not going to be a good solution. The devices that have been developed for edge tracking with contrast, I think potentially that is a useful application. So I think the answer is, it's as in so many things, it depends. Is the strain used in the book compatible with all machines? Yes, it is. So in the first chapter, you will see that there's a methodology for using the strain with all of the manufacturers. So it'll help guide you through there. There are some illustrations to address the sort of buttonology of it. So yes, the answer is yes. People are often concerned about the variations between manufacturers, and this is an issue because the methodology is not exactly the same. So if you're tracking somebody sequentially, for example, for cardio-oncology, you should use the same software for making comparisons. So that's important. But I don't think it means that strain is not useful in a multi-vendor lab. So there are a couple of approaches to this. First of all, this was a very significant problem about 10 years ago, and the ASE, in conjunction with the European Association, got together a group to reach agreement about this, and the variation of strain did reduce between vendors, did reduce substantially after that. So if you're not tracking somebody and you want to use strain to tell you, whether there's subclinical LV impairment, probably each of the tools is fine for that purpose. Just important to be aware that some of them will use endocardial strain as a default setting rather than myocardial strain, and make sure that you're using the numbers for each of those parameters correctly. And then the second thing to say is that if you have a multi-vendor lab, if you are able to get a vendor-independent software, of which there are a variety, you'll be able to get strain with the same meaning on all of your machines. The difference in strain between the vendors is a difference in post-processing, not a difference in acquisition. As a question there, will electronic updates or supplements with new information be there over the next year or two? Yes, that is something that is certainly possible with the ebook. We haven't made firm plans about that, and I think to some extent it will depend on the level of interest and enthusiasm with the book. But that's certainly something that is very feasible, and it is a moving field. So the attraction of the ebook is that updates are feasible, and I'm sure you've seen this occurring in the big cardiology textbooks like Hurst and Brownwells and so on. Okay, Christina, we've had 3 questions. Do you have any other points that you'd like to share with us?
I just want to thank you for following through. We had a bad storm here, and I had a quick power surge, so we're back now. So that's good. The only other thing that I wanted to mention was that we let me make sure I'm sharing my screen here. There we go. That you can purchase your book through our Learning Hub. And we are offering an editor signed copy of the textbook to anyone who orders it before the 31st. For those of you who have already purchased it, you should have received one with the signatures on the page. So that's great. As you can tell by both Dr. Marwick and Dr. Abraham's overview, it's a very in-depth book, gives you a lot of information, and is a great resource. So hopefully you will be able to purchase yours soon. Do you have anything else that you want to share, Dr. Marwick and Dr. Abraham?
Thank you, Christina, for this webinar. Very well handled, and I know you had a power outage, and thank you for coming back. There's one comment, I don't know if Dr. Marwick or you saw it, but it's from Dr. Lineberger, anesthesiologist, who is looking forward to reading the book and says he has a new perspective on perioperative use of strain. So thank you, Dr. Lineberger.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it'd be very interesting to hear your experience with it, Dr. Lineberger. Thank you. All right. Well, Ted, great to see you, and Christina, great to hear from you as well. Hopefully, life will return to closer to normal in the coming years. But good to see everyone. Thanks for your interest, and really enjoyed this as well as the preparation of the book. Have a good day.
Thank you, Tom.